Imagine this. The sound of marching fades into a distant murmur, and in its place you hear the gentle hum of markets, the clatter of wheels on stone roads, and the murmur of many languages trading stories as well as goods. Picture roads stretching like veins across a living empire, carrying letters, olive oil, silk, songs, and the dreams of ordinary people. A single idea tied it all together, spoken in the hushed pride of citizens from Spain to Syria. Peace. Welcome to the Pax Romana, the 200 years that quietly reshaped the world. It begins with a careful promise. In the late years before Christ, Rome had torn itself apart in bitter struggles. Then came Augustus, a man who did not brag like a conqueror, but who rearranged the world like a patient gardener. He trimmed chaos, planted institutions, and told a restless society, "You will have stability." From the 27th year before Christ to the 180th year after Christ, generations were born and grew old under a sky that, for once, did not crack open with civil war. What made it work? Not just soldiers. The legions still stood on the borders, but their role changed. Many of them became builders. They measured the land by the stride and set stone upon stone. A road begun in a chilly British landscape ended under Egyptian sun. A merchant could pack his cart in Lyon and trust that the same coin would be accepted in Antioch. People learned the shape of Rome not from speeches, but from the feel of a well-made road underfoot and the sight of a sturdy bridge over water that once cut communities apart. There is something quietly moving in how ordinary lives tied into this grand design. A potter in North Africa stamped a mark on a bowl that would end up on a table in Gaul. A ship's pilot, often Greek or Phoenician by birth, steered grain through a crowded harbor toward mouths that needed it in the capital. In places like Ostia, near Rome, the docks were a living map of the empire. Spices and perfumes, marble and papyrus, laughter and haggling. The empire breathed through its ports and roads, exhaling prosperity. Yet peace, even when it is real, is never simple. The same roads that carried poets and philosophers also carried captives. The same order that comforted many rested on the labor of those who could not choose their path. In a city that dazzled with fountains and forums, a large share of the people were enslaved. We remember the elegant words of Seneca and the smooth marble of public baths. We should also listen for the quieter stories of those who lifted the stones, cooked the meals, and built the arenas where crowds roared. Even the famous amphitheater we now call the Colosseum owes its origin to prisoners of war, including many taken after the fall of Jerusalem in the 70th year after Christ. Peace can glow on the surface and still cast long shadows. Still, look at the ingenuity that flourished. Law became a common language, reaching beyond tribal custom to offer a sense of shared rules. Engineers pushed aqueducts across valleys with graceful assurance. Doctors traded remedies, teachers copied texts, and artisans learned new tricks from strangers who did not feel so strange anymore. The empire's borders were lines on a map, but within them people felt a new kind of connectedness. You could be born in Spain, serve in Syria, retire in North Africa, and still feel, wherever you stood, that you were part of something recognizably Roman. What I love most about this era are the little discoveries that reveal its heartbeat. Some legionaries kept journals that spoke not of battles, but of supply lists and weather. Shopkeepers scratched quick notes on potsherds, promising delivery next month if the roads held. A child's wax tablet preserved a clumsy alphabet, proof that a parent somewhere believed that learning would shape a safer future. No trumpets in these moments, only the soft rhythm of daily life made possible by a long stretch of order. Of course, the Pax Romana was not a fairy tale. Far from the capital, governors could be heavy-handed, and on distant frontiers there were skirmishes and tensions. The promise of peace meant something different depending on where you stood. For some, it felt like a blessing. For others, it felt like a tight harness. And yet, taken together, those 2 centuries offered millions the rare chance to plan beyond tomorrow. If this kind of history speaks to you, lean in with us. Give this a like to help these timeless stories travel a little farther, share it with someone who loves the ancient world, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires. With the bell on, you will be the first to wander new roads with us, from hidden harbors to forgotten libraries. And here is a question to bring it close to home. If you could choose a life within the Pax Romana, would you sit in the Senate, wrestling with laws and ambition in the heart of Rome? Or would you steer a ship across the Mediterranean, chasing winds, bargains, and the glow of new horizons? I would love to hear your choice and why. Picture this. For the first time in centuries, Roman frontiers weren't soaked in blood. It sounds almost impossible, doesn't it? After decades of brutal civil wars that had torn the Republic apart, Augustus, the mastermind behind what we call the Pax Romana, completely changed the game. Instead of conquering through pure aggression, he chose a different path. Smart diplomacy mixed with just the right amount of intimidation. Here's how it worked. Those fierce Germanic tribes that had been causing Rome headaches for years. Augustus didn't just march his legions north to crush them. Instead, he offered them something they couldn't refuse. Roman citizenship, steady pay, and a chance to join the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen. Some tribal leaders took the deal. Others who refused, well, they quickly learned why Roman legions had such a fearsome reputation. But the real genius was how Augustus handled internal rebellion. Instead of executions and mass punishment, he offered something revolutionary: citizenship and bread, literally. He understood that hungry, excluded people make dangerous enemies, but fed citizens with a stake in the empire make loyal subjects. It was brilliant social engineering disguised as generosity. Now here's something that might surprise you. During this period of peace, Augustus actually reduced the Roman army from 500,000 soldiers down to 300,000. You might wonder how that worked. Fewer soldiers during an era of expansion? The secret was transformation. These weren't just warriors anymore. They became something entirely new. Every single legionary was now a road builder, an administrator, an engineer. They spent their days constructing the famous Roman roads that connected distant provinces, managing local governments, and turning conquered territories into thriving parts of the empire. These soldier administrators became the backbone of Roman civilization, spreading Roman law, language, and culture wherever they went. But let's be honest about what this peace really meant. It wasn't the absence of violence. It was violence so efficiently organized and so overwhelmingly powerful that resistance became unthinkable. The Germanic tribes knew Roman legions were stationed just beyond their borders. Provincial governors understood that rebellion meant facing the full might of Rome. The peace existed because everyone could feel the shadow of those legions, even when they couldn't see them. This wasn't accidental. Augustus created a system where Roman power was felt everywhere, but seen only when necessary. Trade routes flourished because merchants knew Roman law protected them. Cities grew because people felt secure enough to invest in the future. Art and literature thrived because creative minds weren't consumed by the constant threat of war. The transformation was remarkable. Soldiers who had once spent their lives in battle now supervised the construction of aqueducts that brought fresh water to growing cities. Warriors became teachers, passing on Roman military techniques and administrative skills to local populations. The same discipline that made Roman legions unbeatable on the battlefield now built an empire that would last for centuries. While Roman swords gathered dust in their sheaths, something magical was happening across the empire. The sweet sound of coins changing hands. Imagine walking into a marketplace in ancient Britain and paying with the same silver denarius you'd use in Egypt or Spain. That's exactly what was happening during the Pax Romana. For the first time in human history, a truly globalized economy was taking shape. The Roman denarius became the world's first international currency. A merchant in Gaul could sell his wine to a trader from Syria, knowing that those silver coins would be accepted anywhere from the Scottish highlands to the deserts of North Africa. This wasn't just convenient, it was revolutionary. It meant that economic opportunities suddenly expanded beyond anything people had ever imagined. But here's what made it all possible. The roads, and what roads they were. Some of these ancient highways are still being used today, 2,000 years later. Roman engineers didn't just connect cities. They conquered geography itself. They carved through mountains, bridged rivers, and laid stone foundations so solid that modern archaeologists marvel at their durability. These weren't simple dirt paths either. Roman roads were sophisticated engineering marvels, built in layers with drainage systems and mile markers. They carried far more than just people and goods. Ideas traveled these roads. Languages mixed and evolved. A young philosopher from Athens could share his thoughts with a scholar in Alexandria, while a craftsman from Gaul could learn techniques from an artisan in Damascus. The cargo flowing along these routes tells an incredible story of interconnectedness. Wine from Gaul made its way to dinner tables in Rome. Precious silk from distant China adorned wealthy Romans who had never seen the Silk Road. British wool warmed families across the Mediterranean. Spanish silver filled imperial coffers. And yes, sadly, enslaved people from conquered territories were also moved along these same routes, their forced labor helping to build this prosperity. Now, here's a detail that might surprise you. The port of Ostia, which served Rome, was receiving up to 1,000 ships every single day at its peak. Picture that for a moment, 1,000 vessels arriving daily, their holds bursting with goods from across the known world. The harbor must have been an absolutely incredible sight, with ships from dozens of different cultures crowding the docks. But here's the most fascinating part of all. Many of those ships weren't even captained by Romans. Greek navigators, with their centuries of maritime experience, piloted vessels throughout the Mediterranean. Phoenician merchants, whose ancestors had been sailing these waters since before Rome existed, managed much of the long-distance trade. Egyptian sailors brought grain that fed the growing population of Rome itself. This reveals something profound about the Pax Romana. It wasn't just Roman hands building this empire. It was a collaborative effort, whether voluntary or forced, involving people from every corner of the Mediterranean world. Romans provided the military might and administrative structure, but Greeks brought their intellectual traditions, Phoenicians their commercial expertise, Egyptians their agricultural knowledge, and Gallic peoples their craftsmanship. The empire worked because it absorbed and utilized the best talents from everywhere. A Syrian architect might design a Roman bathhouse. A Spanish engineer could oversee road construction in Britain. A Greek teacher would educate Roman children in philosophy and rhetoric. This cultural mixing created something entirely new, a shared Roman identity that could include people from vastly different backgrounds. What's truly remarkable is how this economic miracle transformed daily life for millions of people. A farmer in rural Gaul could now dream of his son becoming a wealthy merchant. A skilled craftsman in Egypt could sell his work to customers he'd never meet in lands he'd never see. The possibilities seemed endless, and for many people, they were. If you're finding these ancient secrets as fascinating as we are, we'd love to hear what amazes you most about this incredible period in history. Share your thoughts with us, and if you're enjoying this journey through the ancient world, subscribe to Legacy of Empires like this video. Your support helps us keep exploring these remarkable stories together. But here's where the story takes a sobering turn. While we've been talking about this golden age of prosperity and peace, we need to acknowledge a harsh reality that Romans themselves often preferred to overlook. Not everyone shared in this so-called age of gold. In fact, the very foundations of Roman prosperity were built on something that would make us deeply uncomfortable today. Picture walking through the streets of Rome at its height. The marble gleamed, the fountains flowed with fresh water, and wealthy citizens strolled through magnificent forums discussing philosophy and politics. But look closer, and you'd notice something troubling. Roughly 1 out of every 3 people you'd encounter wasn't free. They were enslaved people who had been captured in distant wars, born into bondage, or sold to pay debts. This creates a fascinating and disturbing contradiction. While philosophers like Seneca wrote beautiful treatises about virtue, compassion, and the dignity of human nature, their very households were maintained by people who had no legal rights, no freedom to leave, and no control over their own lives. Seneca himself owned hundreds of enslaved people, yet he penned some of history's most eloquent words about treating others with kindness and respect. The irony runs even deeper when you realize that much of what we admire about Roman civilization was literally built by enslaved hands. Those magnificent roads we talked about. Enslaved people quarried the stone, carried the materials, and laid the foundations. The aqueducts that brought fresh water to Roman cities. Enslaved engineers and workers designed and constructed many of them. The beautiful villas where wealthy Romans enjoyed their peaceful lives. Every detail, from the intricate mosaics to the carefully tended gardens, relied on enslaved labor. Perhaps nowhere is this contradiction more striking than in the most famous symbol of Roman engineering and entertainment, the Colosseum. This incredible amphitheater, which still takes our breath away today, was constructed using the forced labor of 12,000 Jewish people who had been captured after the siege of Jerusalem in 70 years after Christ. These weren't anonymous workers. They were families, scholars, craftsmen, and farmers who had been torn from their homeland and forced to build a monument to their conqueror's power. Think about the human drama hidden within those stone walls. A Jewish stonemason who had once worked on buildings in Jerusalem now found himself shaping blocks for an arena where his people's suffering would become entertainment. A young woman who had tended olive groves in Judea now carried water and materials under the scorching Roman sun. Children who should have been learning their traditions and playing with friends instead grew up knowing only the rhythm of construction work and the weight of chains. The Romans had a remarkable ability to compartmentalize this reality. They could genuinely believe in concepts like justice, honor, and civilized behavior, while simultaneously accepting that vast numbers of human beings existed solely to serve their comfort and ambitions. They weren't necessarily cruel people by the standards of their time, but they lived within a system that made certain forms of cruelty invisible to them. What makes this even more complex is that Roman society did offer paths to freedom. Enslaved people could sometimes earn or buy their liberty, and freed people could even become wealthy and influential. Some of Rome's greatest writers, like Terence, had once been enslaved. But these success stories, while real, shouldn't obscure the fact that millions of others lived and died without ever tasting freedom. The peace of the Pax Romana was real for those who benefited from it. Roman citizens enjoyed unprecedented security, prosperity, and opportunities. But this peace came at a cost that was largely paid by people who had no voice in history books, no monuments to commemorate their contributions, and no choice in whether to participate in this grand imperial project. Understanding this doesn't diminish the remarkable achievements of Roman civilization, but it does help us see them more clearly. The roads, the laws, the literature, the architecture, all of it emerged from a complex society where incredible human potential coexisted with systematic human oppression. It reminds us that even in history's most celebrated golden ages, we need to ask, golden for whom? So here we are, 2,000 years later, still living with the echoes of those remarkable 2 centuries of Roman peace. It's incredible when you think about it. Every time you check your calendar, you're using a system that traces back to Roman reforms. When you drive on a major highway, there's a good chance it follows the path of an ancient Roman road. The legal principles that protect your rights today grew from Roman law that was refined during the Pax Romana. But perhaps the most important lesson this period teaches us isn't about roads or laws or even military strategy. It's about the true nature of peace itself. The Pax Romana shows us that peace is never a simple absence of conflict. It's always negotiated, always maintained through a delicate balance of power, compromise, and yes, sometimes force. The Romans didn't stumble into 2 centuries of stability. They engineered it, carefully and deliberately. This makes you wonder about our modern world, doesn't it? We live in our own version of a globalized economy. A single currency, the dollar, is accepted almost everywhere. Goods flow across continents on ships and planes that would amaze ancient Romans. Information travels instantly across networks that connect cultures, just as Roman roads once did. We have international laws and institutions that try to maintain peace between nations. But just like the Roman peace, our modern stability has its own costs and contradictions. There are still people who benefit enormously from this global system, and others who pay prices they never agreed to pay. There are still powers that maintain order through the threat of overwhelming force. There are still voices that go unheard in the grand conversations about how the world should work. The Romans believed they were bringing civilization to barbarian lands. They genuinely thought their system was better than what came before, and in many ways, they were right. Their aqueducts brought clean water to cities. Their laws protected citizens from arbitrary punishment. Their roads connected isolated communities to broader opportunities. But they also imposed their will on millions of people who had no say in the matter. Sound familiar? Every generation faces this same challenge. How do you create stability and prosperity without trampling on the rights and cultures of others? How do you maintain peace without becoming so powerful that your peace becomes indistinguishable from domination? The Romans never fully solved this puzzle, and neither have we. What's fascinating is how human nature hasn't changed much since Augustus first established his empire. People still want security for their families. They still dream of opportunities for their children. They still create art and tell stories and fall in love and worry about the future. The Roman merchant, anxiously watching his ships return from distant ports, wasn't so different from a modern entrepreneur checking global markets on their phone, but people also still struggle with the same moral questions. How much inequality is acceptable for the sake of overall prosperity? How much freedom should individuals give up for collective security? What obligations do the powerful have to the powerless? The Romans grappled with these questions, and their answers shaped 2 centuries of human history. Our answers are shaping the world our grandchildren will inherit. The Pax Romana ended, of course. No empire lasts forever, no matter how powerful or well-organized. But its legacy lives on, not just in the physical remains of roads and buildings, but in the ideas and systems that continue to influence how we organize society. More importantly, it lives on in the questions it forces us to ask about power, peace, and human dignity. If you could bring one aspect of the Pax Romana into our modern world, what would it be? Their incredible engineering skills that created infrastructure lasting millennia. Their ability to create a common identity among diverse peoples. Their legal innovations that protected individual rights. Or perhaps their reminder that even in imperfect systems, human creativity and resilience can flourish. Don't let history die. Like, share, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires to revive forgotten empires. Until the next journey, these stories from the ancient world aren't just fascinating history. They're mirrors that help us understand our own time better. The empires may have changed, but the human dramas, the moral dilemmas, and the search for lasting peace continue. And that's why these ancient voices still have so much to teach us, if we're willing to listen to their whispers across the centuries. Keep history alive by sharing these stories with others who love exploring the past to understand the present. Every conversation about these ancient empires helps ensure their lessons aren't forgotten. Until our next journey through time together, keep wondering about the connections between then and now.